I don't think it is as much of a problem as it used to be about people griping because you gave somebody a narcotics who had some belly pain. Is that an issue for you? No? Yes? Well, there's some people, they're actually, it's kind of fashionable to show all of these papers that basically say it's okay, but there are a couple of papers in here that say, well, we don't think it's okay. And one paper says, we think that there are some people that have been harmed by this process and have some data to suggest it. Whether or not that's really true but this is this business since 1920 when Zachary Cope said, be careful about evaluating these patients. But the first abstract is a review of the literature, all up from 66 to 99. Why do all the literature reviews begin in 1966? Because I think that's when the first effort was made by the National Library of Medicine to synthesize the literature into a retrievable database. So all of these all begin in 1966. So this one goes up to 1999. Up until that time, there were only 5 randomized trials on this topic involving 847 patients total. And yeah, there was less pain and less tenderness. The PE is changed. The physical exam, it's different after you give these people narcotics, but the whole issue is, does it affect decision making? This summary says diagnostic accuracy was not changed and there was no diagnostic delays, although, you know, it's always hard to know about that, and that there was no inappropriate decisions made as a result. And so they said this are 5 positive studies. Number 2 says there's some advantages to doing this in that you may be able to localize the area of pain to, now I see it's mostly down here. The medicines are unlikely to impair cognitive function to the point where you cannot reasonably sign a consent. Withholding of medications for pain may be viewed as coercion, and pain may adversely affect the patient's judgment, and there'll be a paper about that coming up. ACEP survey, 1,000 members, 40% return rate thereabouts. Old survey, 85% of the doctors believed that conservative treatment of pain was a good idea, but only 75% didn't give analgesics until after the surgical exam. Why not? Because they didn't think the surgeons would want them to do that. Here's a study that looks specifically at consent and the use of analgesics or the negative effects of pain. It's a British study. It's quite small. 48 patients, pre-op analgesia. 40 of the 48 felt that the medication did not interfere with their ability to give a consent. That's 40 out of 48. That's 16% said, I think it did interfere with my ability to give consent. So it's not like a slam dunk. And 18 of the 48, which is about 40% of them, said that the pain or the impaired reasoning had interfered with their ability to give a consent. So pain or maybe the drug or maybe a little both. And when they asked them about recall of side effects and complications, they considered it poor in 28 of the 48. So more than half the patients. However, other studies on consent have said you can ask anybody about consent after they've had their operation, and that medicines, all that stuff wipes their brain out, all that propofol, this, that, and the other thing. There's nothing left there, and a lot of people don't recall what they're told, independent of whether they got any analgesia before their surgery. And so a lot of these people cited inadequate explanations, which brings up this issue about informed consent. Informed consent is usually, Mr. So-and-so, we need to take your appendix out here. There's a risk of infection if we do that. You could have an anesthesia. We can have a problem with anesthesia. You might bleed to death, or, you know, there's some risks of that. Sign here. I understand. Any questions? That's honestly is not informed consent. Informed consent is, Mr. So-and-so, we need to take your appendix out. If we do the surgery, here are the risks and benefits of doing the surgery. If we don't do surgery, we can just give you some high-dose antibiotics, put some ice packs on your belly, and that's an alternative thing. Here's the risks and benefits of doing that therapy. And if we don't do anything, here's the risks and benefits of what may come of that. So the idea is basically alternatives. You have to give them alternatives and risks and benefits of the alternative treatment, the treatment that you want to give, and no treatment. That's considered to be the proper way to give informed consent. Nobody really does that. The pro-analgesia studies in adults are papers 5 through 11. Most of these are small, and some people have criticized them, said, you know, all of these studies don't add up to probably a hill of beans because you don't have enough patients in them. And so there's the idea that you could have a negative effect if it involved enough patients. But if you read the conclusions of them, they're all basically in support of giving analgesics in advance. And number 10 is kind of unique because they looked at specifically, was there any increase in diagnostic imaging as a result of that subset of patients who got analgesic, and they didn't find that there was, implying that it was no more difficult to make the diagnosis. The pediatric papers 12, 13, and 14 are all about people's reluctance to give pain medication to kids who had belly pain. Like as an example, 12 is 290 kids, published in 2004, but the chart review was done in 1998. I mean, geez, why did it take 6 years to get this thing published? So of 147 patients referred to a surgeon by emergency physicians, only 14% got pain medications prior to a consult. And when the surgeon saw them, they gave pain medication to an additional 19. So 14 and 19, all told, only 33% got pain medications. So this paper is reflecting an attitude of kind of, well, we're not too aggressive about this. A similar paper is 13 and 14, retrospective study 14, 438 kids, acute abdominal pain. A quarter of them got ED analgesia. A third of them got acetaminophen or ibuprofen as their ED analgesia. And when they got narcotics, the doses were considered to be on the low side. 15, 16, and 17 are 3 studies demonstrating efficacy and safety in kids of analgesics in abdominal pain. They're small studies, but they're double-blind and controlled. Canadian study, 108 kids, a Finnish study of 63 kids, and a study from Cincinnati of 60 kids. If you read the conclusions of 15, 16, 17, they're all, yeah, it's a cool thing to do. But you do need to be aware of the opposing papers, which are 18 and 19. The first opposing paper is in 18. This was published in the American Journal of Surgery, and it's a surgery paper. It is by surgeons, for surgeons, and it was published in 2003. They surveyed emergency physician attendings, and only 1 out of 60 would give a prior anesthesia, would give analgesia after giving the call to the surgery consultant to advise them of that. Only 1 out of 60. So they thought that was an issue. 9 of the 60 always advised the surgery prior to treatment. And then they said, but there was a survey of surgeons in 1996 that said 89% of the 131 surveyed surgeons did not want analgesics prior to consultation. So they said the surgeons don't want it, at least in an older survey. The emergency physicians tend to give it. And so their conclusion was, based on the fact that they think that they had 4 cases of delayed surgery or delayed diagnosis due to analgesics, they said the literature is small and flawed on this topic. We think we had some cases. Emergency doctors tend to do this without consulting us. And the surgeons don't want it. So they concluded, advise the surgeons that you're going to give the pain medication only after you've talked to them and only if the consult is going to be delayed. So that's kind of an opinion paper with there are 4 cases. Gregory, thanks very much for your help. Terrific. I really appreciate you doing this. And Jim, thank you also. Take care, guys. The most interesting paper of the bunch, however, thanks, Jim.
We're going to go eat at Palace Cafe.
See you, buddy. See you. Thank you. 19 is the last paper of the course and is, I think, one of the more interesting ones. So this was published in the Academic Emergency Medicine, not a surgery journal. Canadian analysis of 860 patients. That's a lot of patients. 29% got opiates, and they basically looked at the adverse outcomes. Adverse outcomes were more common in patients who got opiates. In the patients who got opiates, 12.7% of them had adverse outcomes as defined in that study, versus 5.7% in those who did not get opiates. There are people suggesting that use of opiates was an independent predictor of adverse outcomes, odds ratio being 2.1, so it's twice as likely. And these people said, listen, if you really want to do a study that shows people won't get hurt by giving them preoperative analgesics, you have to do a randomized controlled study of at least 1,500 patients. There have been no studies of involving 1,500 patients. So the confidence intervals in these studies are often problematic. However, maybe patients who have more pain than not have more pathology than those, and maybe those people would have more adverse outcomes. So how do you quantify the pathology before the surgery occurs? Maybe it's based on the magnitude of the pain that the patients had, and maybe they got more analgesics. So it's hard to say that this is causality, but they did kind of try to connect adverse outcomes and pain medication, at least in a relatively large study. Now, most people would say, I don't want to buy that, but you should probably be aware that this is not a all or none phenomenon, that there are some people on the other side of this.